Hey everybody, welcome back to Rationally Speaking, where we talk about rational emotive behaviour therapy, usually as it applies to sport and performance, but we kind of talk about all things REBT.
So if you recall in the previous episode, we were speaking about the evolutions of REBT and where it's come from and how it was developed, and it was a development. It wasn't something that just kind of was born in a big bang. And we mentioned a couple of times this interdependent framework, and I think this should be the basis of our sort of discussion today, because this is really the framework where we can look at the key assumptions of REBT and how it's applied in practice.
We kind of have alluded to GABC and kind of specifically spoke about the ABC part of that, in this idea that it's not necessarily what happens to us that causes or leads to the emotions and behaviours we experience. It's largely how we think about it. It's how we think about things, how we construe them, how we perceive them, that shapes our emotions. Of course, the event plays a part in that, what we experience. Of course, it plays a part in our emotions and behaviours, but we get to shape them through what we think and how we perceive. And that's really where RBT does a lot of its work, on that perception part, on that that belief part of that formula.
Well, again, Martin, in the last episode we spoke about like these appealing features of REBT, and this was really appealing for me actually because it humanized it for me. It was this. Well, actually, like when we have adversity, that is annoying. That is frustrating. It can make us feel sad. We're not like immune to sort of like negative life events. It's just that what we can do is our beliefs can sort of perpetuate or reinforce that negativity, and certainly make our consequent emotions and actions unhelpful, and hence irrational. If it's unhelpful and it's not going to aid us, then it becomes irrational. And so this sort of interdependent nature of our goals, of what happens to us, i.e. events, and then the impact of our beliefs on the consequences was particularly appealing for me. And I think you should start off, Martin, by talking about the G. And I wouldn't be doing you any service if I didn't say you had the best kind of title for a part of a book that I've ever read, which is Nothing But a G Thang. Talk to us about that, mate.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we kind of in the previous episodes we talked about how it's important for human beings to have goals. We are goal-directed people. We are a goal-directed species. We're a mobile species. We have to move around. We have to figure out where to move to, what to move away from. So we do have goals. We know that's kind of nested within us. It's kind of this ubiquitous quality of being a human being, But of course, the world is unpredictable. It's uncontrollable. And we are fallible. We are imperfect, which means that, aiming towards a goal doesn't guarantee that we just get it. We're going to have to face some adversity. We are going to have to go through some stresses, some barriers to get to our goals, particularly if they're important goals and they're meaningful goals, because those things, they tend, just by nature, tend not to be easy to achieve. So in this GABC framework, or the interdependent framework that we'll call it, G is really our starting point. We have these goals that we're aiming towards. Some of them are kind of implicit. They're things that are hard to articulate, things based on our survival, what it is to be a human being. But some of them are, you can articulate them. They're more explicit. Like, I want to achieve this, or I want to be this kind of person, or I want to get there. There are things that you can articulate. So when you're working with somebody, partly it's about helping them articulate those goals, and then figuring out what the barriers and adversities are to those goals, what the A's are. So have an individual aiming towards a goal that will undoubtedly face some adversity towards that goal. Now, in the framework, that's not enough to generate or shape an emotion. It's part of the way there. But then what we have is our beliefs, our appraisals, our evaluations of that adversity, that blockage to our goal. We evaluate that, and we have certain beliefs about things blocking our goals, about adversity. It's those beliefs that RBT kind of focuses on and says that those are the things that have a really have a huge influence in shaping our emotions. So we have this kind of GABC framework: G, goals; A, adversity; B, beliefs; C, consequences. Consequences being our emotions and behaviours that are shaped by this interaction between G, A, and B. So it's called this sort of interconnected framework because each of those aspects is linked to every other aspect, in a sense that a change in one can change everything. So if we're saying beliefs are important, then me changing my belief will change C. It will change the consequences of what happens when that adversity takes place. But it also might change my goals, because if I believe, for example, that I can't stand failure, and failure to me is terrible, it's the end of the world, then it's likely that I'll avoid chasing particular goals just to avoid failure. So having that belief shapes my G. It also changes the extent to which adversity is then experienced, because if I'm not aiming for the goal, then there's no adversity to that goal. And therefore I avoid experiencing the pain and upset of not achieving that goal at C. So each one is interconnected. If you change one, you change them all. In RBT, we focus on B because often you can't change the A. Sometimes the A is uncontrollable. Doesn't make sense to in helping somebody through RBT, doesn't make sense to get them to just avoid all adversity or make their lives to the extent they experience no adversity. It's just not realistic. It's not that doesn't map with what human life is about. So we try to focus on B. We try to say, okay, well, you're going to face some adversity, you're going to face some difficulty on the way to this important goal that you've got. How can we make sure that the consequences you experience when you face adversity, because you will face adversity, how do we make it so that the consequences are functional? You experience functional emotions, adaptive behaviors that help you to pursue your goals. Yes, that emotion might feel unpleasant. It might be a negative emotion, but it might be a helpful emotion. It might be functional for you. How do we get you there? Well, part of that is aligning your beliefs with reality, with logic. So your beliefs about that adversity, about yourself, about the world, making them as rational as we possibly can. So when you face adversity, you react in a functional manner. And that's that kind of framework summed up a little bit. And I guess as to why it's important that we understand that, particularly as practitioners.
I think it's definitely important that we understand that. And you mentioned there, like, as practitioners, and I think that leads me on to a comment I was going to make about something you said, which was, in REBT, like, we tend to focus on the B. So this is, this has been labeled kind of elegant REBT or specific, specific REBT, where we may choose to focus on different elements of that framework. And so in order to bring about kind of change, Ellis spoke about this, is the difference between feeling better and being better. So in performance environments, and we mentioned that this is obviously of particular interest to us, in a performance environment, it may not be appropriate all the time to kind of, challenge Bs, to put this perhaps in a bit more of a succinct or sort of like blunt way. It's, if you're a performer that's just about to go out and, onto a football pitch or a basketball court or an athletics track or whatever, and you're feeling nervous, you probably don't want someone, asking you for a philosophical discussion about, your goals and the nature of your goals or your beliefs. What you might want is someone to focus on the C, the consequence, which is, I'm feeling nervous right now. Like, can you help me calm down? Have you sort of like experienced that, Martin? Is that something that is particularly appealing for you as an aspect of REBT in terms of its sort of like pragmatism?
Well, I think we're getting into the nuances there. I think so. An unnuanced version of REBT or a specific version of REBT is we work with the beliefs. So it's your beliefs that is helping shape the emotion. So if you're nervous and anxious and you feel like it's not helping you, then we try to address the beliefs. What you're saying there is, in the applied environment, in the live environment, I'm with an athlete, they're saying to me, I'm too nervous for this performance. I'm too anxious. Okay, well, in that context, I have to make a choice as a practitioner. Do I direct this conversation towards beliefs and start to do some of that work around what are the beliefs that you have, and do you think you could believe something that is more functional? Do I instead have a different conversation that might be lighter and might be more time sensitive? Do we talk about actually here's some techniques for calming the anxiety down from a physiological perspective? Is it about doing some rhythmic breathing, for example? So when we're doing that, we're at sea. We are directly intervening in that work at sea, at the consequences. So we're saying, can I work with this athlete to get them to calm down physiologically? Now that's very different to working with B, to working with them on their beliefs. Now, if my work with the athlete is ongoing, and we've had previous conversations, and REBT has been something we've talked about and gone through, then of course I can start to have conversations about beliefs because it's quicker. That person already has the contextual understanding to have that conversation about beliefs. I can say, remember, let's think about our beliefs. What are you saying to yourself? Is there anything you could say to yourself that might help you in this moment? But if I come from left field for the first interaction with an athlete around REBT and I go in at the beliefs level, that to me isn't a brief conversation that should happen in that context.
Yeah.
That needs some context. It needs some work, some foundational work that's been done already. But I think that the danger of talking about that is that we move into a nuanced idea of REBT, which I've written about and which I practice, but it I wouldn't say it deviates away from core REBT, but it's not the common idea of what REBT is. The common idea is that REBT is about working with beliefs, and that's fine. However, this framework, this GABC framework, allows us to work with any of those letters, with any of that. So we can work with an athlete to shape some goals. We can work with an athlete to figure out what are the adversities that you might face. Are there any obvious adversities that we can kind of limit and make sure you don't go into that? Can we shape some beliefs that are more helpful, more healthy, and more helpful? Can we work with C to maybe physiologically calm down, or the opposite, to activate you when you go into performance? Of course, you can work with each element in a general REBT sense, which is something I'm a big advocate for. But for people coming to REBT new for the first time, maybe, most of the literature you will read will focus on B. And that's fine. And that is at the core of REBT. And that is something that we'll definitely get into. What is B? But I think it's important people understand there is a general, broader landscape in REBT that this framework that we're talking about applies to.
I mean, it's interesting you brought up this applied sense there. Certainly, what I find my sort of more limited applied experience in you is that people don't want to amend their goals. They tend to be quite happy with their goals, even if that ultimate goal isn't promoting what Ellis called long range hedonism, which isn't this kind of simple pleasure seeking principle that Freud advocated. It's more, what's going to make you a happy, functional human being, or sort of like more content individual. And people tend not to want to address that. They kind of, they know what they want, or they think they know what they want. And I found that quite challenging, actually, that sort of, is this what you want? Or do you think this is kind of contributing to any distress at all? So yeah, that focus on the B is particularly important.
Well, I think you work with people in my experience anyway, work with people in layers. So an individual often comes to you with a problem related to C. Often they would say, I'm experiencing anxiety. I'm struggling to deal with the pressure of performance. Or they might say, I'm getting too angry when things don't go my way. Or they might have been deselected. They can't get into the team. And part of the reason they come and see you from a consequence, from a C perspective, is because they just feel rejected, and they're down and they're hurt. And they might be, just experiencing low mood because they're not getting what they want. So often the C is the stimulus for them to come and talk to us. Sometimes it can be A. Sometimes there's a situation that I've faced that I'm struggling with, or is counter to my goals, or there's something coming up that I'm struggling to come to terms with, that I know it's going to be difficult. So sometimes they come to you with A. Very rarely do they come to you with B. And very rarely that first session is, I've got these beliefs that I'm struggling to make sense of. I've got these beliefs that aren't helping me. That to me is a rare case. usually you're going to have to do the connective work there with that client. They're usually coming to you with a problem, with an issue. That's often the case. And then sometimes none of that happens and they want to achieve something. So sometimes they come to you with, gee, I've got this goal in mind. I want to chase this thing. I want to work towards this thing. And I want to work with you to sort of help me to get there. And in that case, we're really looking at proactive REBT of saying, okay, well, let's work with you on a goal or a series of goals and make sure this goal isn't just hedonistic. It's not just pleasure seeking. It's an actual. It's not just superficial. It's a value that you have of something you want to work towards. Okay, let's set that. Let's set those foundations properly. Let's have a conversation about what you want to achieve, who you want to become. Then let's figure out what the adversities might be that you're going to face. What can we foresee? How can we use foresight to figure out, well, actually, that's going to be difficult. That's going to be tricky. I might have to have a tough conversation here. I might have to make a sacrifice there. Okay. What are beliefs that you have that you think might limit your capacity to achieve that goal? Then we can talk about beliefs. Okay? And when do emotions come into the picture? What emotions might we have to deal with? When we anticipate these adversities, can we anticipate our reaction and try to make it so our reaction is functional and healthy? And look, you don't know what you don't know. So you can't predict the future. But you can foresee that when you're chasing an important goal, you're not just going to get there in a straight line from A to B. You're going to face some adversity, and then that's going to conjure up in you ideas about yourself and the world. And RBT suggests that if you align those ideas and beliefs you have about yourself and the world with rationality, make them make sense, make them empirically valid, then you are more likely to experience functional emotions, which continues to help you towards your goal, versus believing in ways that are counter to evidence, counter to logic, that are unhelpful ways of thinking, in a sense that they don't help you towards your goal and might actually stop you from achieving that goal, and the suffering that potentially brings. So, when we think about goals, it's fundamental to RBT. It's not written about that much. I've written about it quite a bit, partly because of where I work within sport. It's obviously a super important part of being a sports psychologist, but it's also just fundamental outside of that context. It's fundamental in any context because we have goals as human beings, and it's having the goal that starts to make the adversity salient. If there's no adversity, there's no goal. And in the previous conversation that we had, we talked about Richard Lazarus. He understood that as well. You spoke about goal obstruction. So having a conversation about goals is sort of a fundamental part, I would say, to REBT. Even though the focus is usually on B, I think G is a really important part of that.
Do you know, this is where you can really go into this interdependent framework a little bit. You've spoken about negative events. We often see it as progressive, kind of sequential. So we have our goal, and then something happens that stops us meeting that goal, and then our beliefs will shape whether we see that as adverse or not, and then we have these consequences that follow. But it goes the other way around as well. That's the nature of the framework, in the sense of our beliefs. If we see something, if our belief is something along the lines of I must not fail, or I would be worthless, or I would be useless a human being if I were to fail, then if we have an event coming up, maybe like a sporting contest, for instance, that might pose a threat to that belief, then we start to see that event as bad, and it hasn't even happened yet. So this is what particularly appeals to me about REBT, is this, well, like you've mentioned, everything will work together. And from a practitioner perspective, it's challenging those Bs that are really important. And those Bs are so aligned with our G, our goals, that those are perhaps areas of focus for in applied practice.
Yeah, but also, extending what you said there, I often talk about attentional bias.
Right.
So if I believe that being rejected is the worst thing in the world, and I can't stand it, it's intolerable, and being rejected makes me a complete fool and a complete idiot, then not only might I avoid situations in which I might face rejection, which can limit me, can stop me from going into social interactions and pursuing certain things. Not only does it do that, when I am in those situations, it also biases my attention towards stimulus that might suggest that I'm being rejected. Even if it's not the facts of the situation, even if the person in front of me interacting with me isn't rejecting me, or maybe they've given me some negative feedback, and I'm just so scared of rejection. To me, it's the end of the world that I just see that as rejection and take that to heart. That's attentional bias. That's me extracting what I fear from the stimulus, from the room, even if it's not necessarily present, because I'm so fearful of it that I'll just see it everywhere. And because I see the A, then the B becomes relevant. So I see the rejection, even though it might not be there. I perceive it as rejection. Then I say, this has happened again. I can't stand it. I'm such an idiot. I'm such a loser. Then we experience our unhealthy negative emotions. So versus, okay, well, I don't want to be rejected. It's inconvenient to be rejected. But look, it's not the end of the world. And I can certainly tolerate it because I've tolerated it before. I can tolerate it again. I'm less likely to be attentionally biased because I'm not fearful of it. So I don't extract rejection from that social interaction. I'm less likely to extract that rejection. And this is really important, the language that I'm using. What I'm saying here is you can direct your perception. You can shape your perception through how you believe. So this isn't just so-and-so has said something to me. Here's what I believe. Here's my emotional reaction. No, it's not. It doesn't have to be that reactive. It can be. Here's the things that I will believe about myself and the world. That fortifies me against the adversity that I will face and might face. So if I align my beliefs with reality, with rationality, it helps me proactively to go into some of those situations where there might be adversity. If I align my beliefs with irrationality, very extreme, very rigid, very dogmatic beliefs, then I can go into almost any situation. And because I'm so fearful of that adversity, I will perceive it there. And therefore I will get I'll get the emotional reaction I deserve in that sense. So when we speak about this interactive, this interconnected, interdependent, whatever you want to call it, this idea that GABC connect to each other forwards and backwards, it means we're able to see opportunities for intervention for sure. As we said, you can work with G, you can work with C, you can work with A and B, whatever you want to work with. But also it helps people to understand why the emotions occur as they do, and helps them to understand why it's so important to focus on the B, because it has this unilateral effect on all the other bits and pieces in that framework.
I guess a question that I have here is, in your experience of working with people in the applied sense, is there a responsibility on the participant, the client, to be open-minded and to kind of accept and want to know more about this framework, or is that burden perhaps on the practitioner to say, look, like this is how it is? You've mentioned this in your book. You talk about working, you're scientists in cahoots, you're working together. How important is that kind of that symbiotic relationship between practitioner and client in REBT?
Yeah, I mean, you want to be aligned, don't you? You want to be aligned. And in some ways, it's not dissimilar to a coaching relationship with an athlete. There are certain principles that will lead to success. And within psychology, we have good evidence that there are certain principles that are more likely to lead to success, no matter what success looks like. It might mean kicking the ball better. It might mean being more content. It might mean having the opportunity to experience more positive emotion. But whatever success looks like, we do have these common principles that we have a fairly good understanding of. Now, it's pointless me going in too directive and saying, this is how it is, this is how it works, so here's what we're going to do, because I haven't onboarded that individual. They have no reason to listen to me or take on board what I'm suggesting. it's more accurate to characterize the relationship, as you said there, as scientists in cahoots. There's what we call in psychotherapy a therapeutic alliance, which is, I think, a nice word. The idea of the alliance is, look, me and you are going to work on this issue together that you've candidly presented to me. We're going to work on it together and see if we can figure this out. Part of figuring this out will involve some of my knowledge as a psychologist of how the mind works and some of the patterns that we've noticed in science and in practice around the kinds of things that might work if you're interested in really pursuing this goal. So, but then a big part of that is your experiences as an athlete and how you see it and how this fits within your context and the way that you construe the world. So you have a blending of those ideas. Here's my expertise, here's your expertise, here's what I bring to the party, here's what you bring to the party, and together we'll figure this issue out. Now, we have many, many frameworks in sports psychology, in psychotherapy, many frameworks we can use, and there seems to be a consistency with research findings that it's really the therapeutic alliance which is the most important aspect, regardless of the framework you use. If you don't have a strong therapeutic alliance, if you and the person you're working with aren't connected and aren't on the same page, then it's much less likely that your framework is going to be able to help that individual. So that's our first job, is to do that and to make that connection really, really strongly and to look after that connection. Not to say that it all has to go smoothly. And a relationship with somebody is going to have its peaks and its troughs, and it's the same with any therapeutic relationships. But there does have to be that alliance that we're working towards the same thing here, and what we're working towards really should be dictated by the client, by the athlete. They're the ones, it's their lives, their experiences, and we're trying to help them to get to where they want to go. So we don't go in and say, right, well, that's not a very good goal. Here's a better goal for you to chase. And here's some beliefs you can have as well to believe over the course of your life. Let me know how things go. It's not, it's not that. It's not that. It is you are scientists in cahoots. You're trying to figure out a problem together with your equal skill sets, your equal knowledge, just sometimes in different spaces.
I really like that power dynamic in REBT. It's codependent. There's a coordination there between two people, and an element of trust that needs to be kind of developed as well.
Psychotherapy has done a lot in this space. They understand how important this is, and when you go into the person-centered frameworks, that's obviously fundamental. Probably more fundamental than it is in REBT. But the point I'm trying to make is it's still there in REBT, even though it's not necessarily written about as much. It's still there. The other thing is that REBT is humanistic. Some people might think that a cognitive behavioural therapy like REBT, that's not humanistic, because humanistic therapies, they're different. They're, but that's not the case. REBT is humanistic. It recognises humans for what they are, and helps them to deal with their humanness, fallibility, their uniqueness. The idea that they have some volition over their choices, it works with people as human. It recognises them as humans first. So it is humanistic, and in that sense, it does kind of certainly focus on developing the relationship, understanding the person from their perspective. Empathy is an important part of that. So Roger's core conditions are still in the room.
Yeah.
When you're practicing REBT, this isn't just let's work through the framework. It's not purely psychoeducational. You still have to look after that relationship initially.
Yeah, I was saying that, Ellis speaks quite extensively about universal self-acceptance, universal other acceptance, and then universal environment acceptance or situational acceptance. What could be more, Rogers than that? It's this kind of unconditional acceptance, and it's important to say that's not condoning something as well. We're not sort of, I think sometimes coaches in particular might think, oh, so we accept failure. That's very different to not caring. this sort of difference between passive acceptance, like you've mentioned before, and then active acceptance. If I'm a tennis player, I'm going to lose a game every now and again. I'm going to lose a set, and if I probably don't think I am, or if I do, then I'm a worthless human being, or I'm a failure. I'm probably not going to succeed or do too well if I have that belief. And so accepting situations and then dealing with them in a proactive, helpful way, I guess, is a cornerstone of this theory, and helps us distinguish between these terms rational and irrational. Is it helpful? Is this helping me, or is this unhelpful?
You draw the comparison with Rogers there. This idea of unconditional positive regard. It is similar to unconditional acceptance. It's this kind of ability to support somebody and help them, really, regardless of what's happened, what they've done, or what they're experiencing. It's a stance. It's a useful therapeutic stance to take when we're trying to help somebody. Because the opposite is judgment and derision. I don't know where you're going to get to as a practitioner if you're trying to help somebody, whilst also at the same time judging them for what they say and what they've done and what's happened to them. That doesn't seem to be a helpful orientation to working with people.